Your well was toxic, Mr. Grant. It was toxic long before my client drilled a foot of ground in that county. Isn't that right?
My wife drank that well. It killed her.
My son's drinking it tonight. Out of a hospital cup. Sit down, sir. You said the water was born bad. So tell me which one's the liar. The dead one or the sick one? Your Honor, I object. The witness is not following proper procedure. Please instruct him. Not till somebody reads the line. Their own scientist. 16 years ago. 5 words. Objection. We are poisoning these families. Her name's at the bottom. Their chairman told her to bury it.
Sit him down. He's a janitor with a grievance.
He's sitting right there. Ask him how he found the nerve to bury it 16 years.
Your Honor, Lyle said, the plaintiffs entered no such document, and this witness is not... Nothing's born poison. Isaiah's voice did not climb. It dropped, which was worse. Somebody makes it, same as a bullet's got a barrel. His name's on this page. Enough. Judge Miriam Stroud brought her gavel down once. Mr. Grant, put the pages down. Mr. Lyle, sit. We are going to have a hearing about what those pages are, and we are going to have it now. And in the third row, an old man nobody was watching yet, wet eyes, a folded coat across his lap, bowed his head because he knew exactly what was on that page, and had known for 16 years. Here is what most people never learn until it is their turn. You can drink poison for 20 years and call it water, because it is clear, because it comes out of the tap, because the men who put it there wear ties and hold press conferences and sponsor the Little League. Poison does not have to taste like anything. It only has to be patient. The town was called Maro Creek, and it sat downhill and downstream from the Corliss Chemical Company, which had been making non-stick coatings and firefighting foam there since before most of the living had been born. The chemicals Corliss used were the kind the newspapers had started calling forever chemicals, PFAS, because they never break down, never wash away, never leave. They soak down into the ground and into the cold water aquifer, and the people of Maro Creek drilled their wells into that aquifer and drank it, and made coffee with it, and boiled pasta in it, and mixed their infant's formula with it for a generation. Isaiah Grant was 38 years old, and he had buried his wife with that water in his own body, and now his son was sick with the same thing that killed her, and he had come to court to find out why. He was not a lawyer. He was a maintenance technician who worked the night shift at the very plant that was on trial. The company poisoning his family was the company that signed his paycheck. He had learned to hold those two facts in the same chest, the way you learn to breathe around a broken rib, because a man with a sick child does not get to quit the job with the insurance. His wife's name had been Naomi. She died 4 years back of kidney cancer, and when she died, the doctors had used the word unlucky, and Isaiah had believed them, because what else do you do? His son was named Jonah. Jonah was 9. 6 weeks before that morning in court, a scan had found a shadow on Jonah's kidney, and the word the doctors used this time was not unlucky. The word this time was again. Same organ, Isaiah had said to the oncologist, in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and vending machine coffee. Same organ my wife died of. You're telling me that's chance. I'm telling you I've seen it 4 times this year, the doctor had said quietly. From 4 houses inside 2 miles of each other. I'm not allowed to tell you what I think, but I'd have your water tested. Today. So he had. And the water came back at almost 500 times the federal safe limit for the very chemicals Corliss made. And Isaiah Grant stopped believing in luck. The families of Maro Creek had banded together and sued. Their lawyer was a woman named Lena Brandt, who ran a 2-person environmental firm out of a storefront, and who had gone up against Corliss once before, years earlier, and lost. She lost because she could never prove the one thing that mattered, that the company knew. Corliss always said the same thing in the same calm voice. We had no way of knowing. The science was unsettled. And besides, the wells were bad on their own. Blame the ground, blame the farmers, blame the dead woman's own kitchen faucet. Your well was toxic, was the whole strategy, dressed up in a $1,000 suit. Make the victims, the villains of their own poisoning. It had worked before. Everett Corliss had every reason to believe it would work again, because it always had. Because that is what money buys. Not innocence, but the benefit of the doubt, over and over, until the person asking the questions runs out of money or runs out of life. What Everett Corliss did not know that morning was that 3 nights earlier, a maintenance man he had never met had been handed a work order to destroy some old equipment, and had opened it instead. The work order had been ordinary. Isaiah found it taped to the door of the west storage cage at the start of his shift, in his supervisor's handwriting. Pull the decommissioned archive server and the box drives. Run them through the industrial shredder before end of week. Sign the disposal log. Companies destroy old records all the time. There was nothing on the order that said why. But Isaiah's son was dying, and there was a lawsuit in the papers with his own employer's name in the headline. And a man in that situation reads everything twice. He stood in the cage under a buzzing light and looked at a dusty server that someone, somewhere high up, wanted turned into confetti before Friday. And he thought about how the company had testified for 2 weeks that no relevant records existed. No relevant records, he said out loud, to nobody, to the dust. Then why are you in such a hurry to grind them up? He did not shred it. He carried it to the maintenance bench. And he was good with his hands and better with machines than anyone gave the Nightman credit for. And he powered it up and he opened it. And there, in an archive folder that should have been ash years ago, were 16 years of internal email. And near the top of the oldest folder was a name he did not yet recognize, but would never forget. Dr. Carol Aldridge, staff chemist, and a subject line that read simply, "Urgent, cold water results. Please read before you delete this." He copied everything to 2 drives that night. He put one in his truck and mailed the other to Lena Brandt's office with no note, because he did not yet trust the phones. And some instinct older than the law told him that a thing this dangerous should exist in more than one place. Then he put the server back on the disposal shelf. And he did not sign the log, and he went home and sat on the edge of his sleeping son's bed and read email on his phone until the sun came up. And he understood that he was holding the reason his wife was dead. The emails told a story with no gaps in it. 16 years ago, Dr. Carol Aldridge, a chemist Corliss had hired to run routine environmental testing, had pulled samples from the monitoring wells around the plant, and the numbers had frightened her so badly she drove them to the lab twice to be sure. The cold water aquifer, the water under the whole town, was saturated with the company's own compounds, at levels no honest scientist could call anything but a poisoning. She wrote it up. She sent it to 3 vice presidents and to the chairman himself. "We are poisoning these families," she wrote in the email Isaiah had held up in court. "This is not a spill we can hose down. It is in the drinking water of every household drawing from cold water, and it does not degrade. And children are the most exposed. We have a legal and moral duty to notify the county health department this week. I cannot overstate how serious this is." And the answer came back the same afternoon from the office of the chairman, and it was 4 sentences long, and it was the coldest thing Isaiah had ever read. "Carol, take a breath. These readings are preliminary, and the science on these compounds is not settled, whatever the activists claim. Do not contact any outside agency. That decision is above your pay grade and is being handled. Let's discuss your future with the company on Monday." 2 weeks later, Dr. Carol Aldridge was gone from Corliss Chemical, and the health department was never called. And the town kept drinking, and the wells kept feeding the aquifer, and the aquifer kept feeding the tap, and the tap kept feeding Naomi Grant, while she carried and nursed a son who would, 9 years on, grow a shadow on his kidney exactly where his mother grew hers. "This is it," Lena Brandt said when Isaiah laid the pages on her desk. Her hands were shaking. "Isaiah, this is the thing I could never get. In 11 years fighting these people, I have never once had the thing that says they knew. This says they knew. This says the chairman knew, in writing, and chose the town would rather die than be warned." She looked up. "Where did you get it?" "Off a machine they told me to destroy Friday." "They told you to destroy it." Lena sat down slowly. "They're shredding the archive mid-trial. That's not just proof they poisoned the town. That's proof they're still covering it up, right now, this week." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "This is either the case of my life, or it's the thing that gets us both buried. Probably both." There was a science to what they had to do next, and Lena laid it out plainly. because Isaiah had earned plain. The emails alone were a bomb. But a bomb the defense would try to defuse three ways. They would say the documents were fake, they would say they were stolen, and they would say the wells were dirty for reasons that had nothing to do with the plant. The first was the easiest to beat, and the last was the most important. So Lena went at the last one first. Here's the one fact they can never get around, she told Isaiah. And she told it to the jury a day later, standing in front of a chemist she'd put on the stand. PFAS are not natural. There is no vein of them in the rock. There is no spring that bubbles them up. They do not exist anywhere on this earth that a human being did not manufacture them. So when Corliss stands up and tells you these wells were toxic on their own, ask them the only question that matters. She turned to her expert. Doctor, can a well be naturally contaminated with PFAS? No, the chemist said. It's a contradiction in terms. These molecules are invented. If they're in the water, a factory put them there. There is no other door they can come through. No other door, Lena repeated. So the question in this case was never whether the water was poison. Everyone agrees it's poison. The only question is who made the poison. And the poison has a maker's mark on it, like a bullet has rifling. Doctor, the compounds in the cold water wells, whose product are they? They match the formulations manufactured at the Corliss plant. Same chain length, same signature. It's their molecule. To make the molecule mean something a jury could feel, Lena called the people it had gotten into. She called a woman named Rosa Delgado, who had lost a husband and a brother from the same street inside 3 years, and who held a framed photograph in her lap the whole time, she testified, because she said she was afraid that if she put it down, her hands would shake too hard to answer. How many funerals? Lena asked her. On your one street. Just your street. 9, Rosa said. In 11 years. On one street of 16 houses. We used to joke the water tasted like the pool. We'd run it a minute to clear it, and it never cleared. We thought that was normal. Everybody's water did that, so we thought it was normal. She looked at the jury. It was not normal. 9 funerals is not normal. I just didn't have anybody telling me the number until now. And did anyone from the Corliss Company in all that time ever come to your street and tell you the number? No, Rosa Delgado said. The only person who ever came to my street to warn us, somebody told me later, got herself fired for it. It landed like a stone in a still pond, and Judge Stroud let the ripples spread before she said, "Next question, counsel." That was the first small win, not a ruling, not a verdict, just a jury that had stopped hearing a chemistry lecture and started hearing a body count. Lena felt the room move, and she pressed it, and she rested that afternoon, knowing that for the first time the town's dead had names inside the record. Across the aisle, Bradford Lyle rose smoothly and began to chip at it, the sample chain of custody. The margin of error, whether matches, meant identical. And this is the thing about a good defense lawyer. He can make the sky sound negotiable. But he could not make PFAS grow in the ground, and the jury could see him trying to, and for the first time in 11 years, Lena Brandt watched a Corliss jury lean forward instead of back. Everett Corliss did not lean either way. He sat with his hands folded, and he watched Isaiah Grant the way a man watches a dog that has gotten loose, calculating not whether it will bite, but how far it can run before someone puts it down. That night, in an office on the top floor of a building the town could see from anywhere, Everett Corliss made a phone call. "The maintenance man," he said, "Grant. I want to know everything. Where his kid is treated, who holds the mortgage, whether there's a mother in the picture or he's on his own, and I want that server disposal log to show it was completed on schedule." A pause. "I don't care how. If the log says the machine was destroyed Friday, then whatever he claims to have is a fabrication he built at home. Do you understand me? He didn't find our records. He forged them. That's the story. Go make it true." The man on the other end of the line was named Vincent Doyle, and Vincent Doyle understood. To understand Everett Corliss, you had to understand that he had never once, in his own mind, done a wrong thing. His grandfather had built the plant with his hands during the war, making the coatings that kept aircraft engines from seizing, and his father had grown it, and Everett had inherited it the way other men inherit a name or a face, as a thing that was simply his and simply right because it fed the town and filled the church and put the lights on the football field on Friday nights. When the readings came across his desk 16 years ago, he had not thought, I will let these people die. He had thought, the science isn't settled and the activists exaggerate. And if I call the health department, I hand our competitors a knife and put 400 people out of work over numbers that might mean nothing. He had told himself he was protecting the town. Men like Everett Corliss always tell themselves they are protecting the town. It is the oldest lie power tells and the most comfortable, because it lets a man bury a warning and sleep like a saint, and it works right up until the day the water he ignored crawls into a courtroom carrying his own words. The next morning, Isaiah Grant was fired. The letter said unauthorized access to company systems and removal of proprietary materials, and it was waiting on the windshield of his truck in the hospital parking garage, which was how he knew they had followed him to where his son was. He read it standing between a concrete pillar and the elevator that went up to the pediatric oncology floor. And he did not curse, and he did not crumple it, because Naomi had taught him that a raised voice becomes the story, and he had a son upstairs who needed the story to be about the water and not about an angry man in a garage. But losing the job meant losing the insurance, and losing the insurance meant losing the plan for the surgery that a scheduling coordinator had that same week penciled in for 11 days out. 11 days. He stood in the garage and did the arithmetic that poor people are always being asked to do, the arithmetic where the answer is a child, and he felt the floor tilt. Then his phone rang, and it was a number he didn't know, and a voice he'd never heard said the most reasonable, most evil thing anyone had ever said to him. Mr. Grant, I represent parties with an interest in the Corliss litigation. I'm going to speak plainly because I respect your time. You're a single father. You've just lost your job and I'd imagine your health coverage. Child Protective Services takes a dim view of a home in that condition. No income, a gravely ill minor, a parent facing criminal charges for theft. It would be a shame for your son to spend his treatment as a ward of the county while his father sits in a holding cell. All of that goes away. The charges, the job, the coverage tomorrow, if the materials you took are returned and you testify that you fabricated them. Think about who needs you well, Mr. Grant. Think about who's upstairs. Say your name, Isaiah said. Think about who's upstairs, the voice said again, gently, and hung up. That was the day the story stopped being about a lawsuit and started being about a family. Vincent Doyle did not carry a weapon to that parking garage. He did not need one. The most powerful men do not break your arm. They show you a door where your child is on one side and the truth is on the other, and they let you break your own heart choosing. That is the machine, and it does not run on cruelty. It runs on love, aimed backward. Isaiah drove home and sat at the kitchen table and put the disconnection notice from the power company next to the termination letter next to the hospital's estimate. And he prayed, which is a thing he did not perform for anyone. And while he prayed, he found himself staring at the tap over the sink, and a memory surfaced that he had not touched in years. A woman at the door. Long time ago. Jonah barely walking. A woman had come up their steps one evening, tired looking, with a cardboard box of pamphlets. And she'd said something about the water. Don't drink the tap. Get it tested. And Isaiah had been polite the way you are polite to people you think are a little unwell. And Naomi, who was kind to everyone, who could not turn a soul away. Naomi had asked the woman if she wanted to sit a minute and had poured her a glass of lemonade on the porch, made from the tap, made from the poison, and the woman had held the glass and not drunk it and looked at both of them with an expression Isaiah only now, at this table, understood, and had said, "You have a little one. Please, just get it tested," and left her pamphlet, and gone. They'd thrown the pamphlet away. They'd laughed about it, kindly later. The water lady. That night he could not sleep. So he did what he had done every night since the diagnosis. He went and sat on the floor beside Jonah's bed. The boy slept the thin, careful sleep of the sick, and Isaiah watched the small chest rise and fall, and without deciding to, he began to hum low the tune Naomi used to sing over this same bed when the boy was small. A slow, wandering thing with no real words, the kind of song a mother makes up and never writes down. Jonah stirred and reached out in his sleep the way he'd done since he was an infant, and his hand found his father's thumb and closed around it and held on. Isaiah looked at that small hand around his thumb, and he thought about all the glasses of water he had poured into this child with his own 2 hands, morning after morning, cereal and juice and the cup, by the bed at night, every one of them clear and cold and deadly. And he had done it smiling, had done it thinking he was taking care of his son. He had poisoned his own boy with love and a kitchen faucet, the same way Naomi had poisoned him, the same way the whole town had gone on poisoning the people it loved most because the poison was invisible, and the men who made it wore ties. He pressed his forehead to the edge of the mattress, and he wept as quietly as he knew how, so as not to wake the boy whose hand was wrapped around his thumb, and he made a promise into the dark that he would not be paying it lip service later. He would not sit down, whatever it cost. Whatever door they showed him, he would not sit down until somebody read it out loud. The next morning, before the coffee, before the drive to the hospital, he called Lena. "The scientist," he said. "Aldridge. What did she look like?" "I never met her. She died 2 years ago. Why?" "Because I think she came to my door. I think she got fired for writing that email, and then she went house to house on her own trying to warn people, and we gave her lemonade made out of the thing she was warning us about." His voice cracked once, and he pressed it flat. "She warned us. To our faces. And we were nice to her, and we ignored her. And my wife is dead, and my son—" "Isaiah, she warned us. Isaiah, listen to me." Lena's voice had changed. "If Carol Aldridge went to your door after they fired her, then she didn't just sit on what she knew. That was a woman who could not stop telling the truth, even when it cost her everything. Women like that, they don't trust a company to keep a record. They make copies, they hide them. Carol used to say, people who worked with her told me she used to say she'd left the truth somewhere, they'd never think to burn it. A breath. There might be another copy of all this, outside the company, somewhere they can't shred. It was the first thin thread of a lifeline, and it was so faint that Lena almost didn't say it because hope, offered to a drowning man, and then withdrawn, is its own kind of cruelty. But she said it. Somewhere they'd never think to burn it. Neither of them knew where. Neither of them knew if it still existed. But it was out there, maybe, and they both wrote it down in the part of the mind where you keep the things you cannot yet afford to believe. The trial, meanwhile, was going well, which is exactly when these things go wrong. Lena had found the one living person besides Isaiah who could put the emails beyond doubt, a man named Curtis Rowe, who had been Dr. Aldridge's laboratory technician 16 years earlier. Curtis had run the samples with his own hands. He remembered the day she got the results. He remembered her driving them back to retest. He remembered, most of all, being told, a month later, that the project was closed and his notebooks were to be turned in and not discussed. He had kept his silence for 16 years, the way frightened, decent people do, telling himself it wasn't his to tell. "It's mine to tell now," Curtis said in Lena's office, an old man's hands wrapped around a paper cup. "I've watched that town bury people for 16 years and told myself I only ran the machine. I ran the machine. I read the number. I knew the number was a death sentence, and I turned in my notebook and went home. I'm not doing it anymore." He looked at Isaiah. "Your wife, was she a Coldwater House?" "She was." "Then I'm sorry," Curtis Rose said. "I'm so sorry. Let me help. Put me on the stand. I'll tell them I ran the tests. I'll tell them the emails are real. I'll tell them I turned in the truth, and they buried it. Let an old man do one right thing before he was scheduled to testify on a Thursday." On Wednesday night, Curtis Rowe's car left a dry, straight county road at a curve he had driven 10,000 times and went into the ravine, and Curtis Rowe died. The sheriff called it a single-vehicle accident, an older man, late hour, maybe a deer. There were no skid marks. There was no deer. There was a mile back, a stretch where a second set of tire tracks came up close behind his and then peeled away, but that did not make it into the first report, and by the time anyone asked, the road had been rained on. Isaiah heard it on the morning news and had to sit down on the floor of his kitchen. And in a conference room across town, Bradford Lyle rose before Judge Stroud and did the thing that Everett Corliss had bought and paid for. "Your Honor, with the greatest respect for the deceased, the plaintiff's entire documentary case now rests on materials that were physically stolen. The plaintiff's own witness, Mr. Grant, admits removing them from a secured company server he was employed to service. The only individual who could have authenticated those materials independent of Mr. Grant has tragically passed. We have no way to test their genuineness. They are unverified. They are the fruit of a theft, and I move that every one of these so-called emails be excluded from evidence in their entirety. Miss Brandt, the judge said. Lena stood, and for a moment she had nothing, and everyone in the room could see she had nothing. Your Honor, the timing of Mr. Rowe's death alone is not evidence, counsel, however much it troubles us all. Do you have a chain of authentication for these documents that does not depend on the deceased or on your own client, who is himself under indictment for taking them? And there it was, the floor tilting again, because the honest answer was no. Without Curtis Rowe, the emails came into court through one door only, through Isaiah, a fired employee facing theft charges, exactly the man the defense had spent a week painting as a liar with a grudge. Judge Stroud was not corrupt. She was careful, and the law was the law. And the law does not care that a man was murdered on a dry road to make a gap in the record. The gap was real. She would, she said, rule in the morning, but her face said what her mouth would not. The emails were about to disappear, and with them the case, and with the case, the surgery, and with the surgery. They killed him, Isaiah said in the hallway, quiet to Lena. You know they killed him. He was going to fix everything, and now he's dead. And now the judge is going to throw it all out, and Corliss is going to walk, and my son is going to... He stopped. He put his back against the wall and slid down it until he was sitting on the courthouse floor in front of God and the janitor, and for the first time since Naomi died, he could not find the bottom of it. Isaiah, Lena crouched in front of him, the copy, Carol's copy. Somewhere they'd never think to burn it. If it exists, it authenticates everything independent of you, independent of Curtis. It's the only thing left. We have until morning. Where would she put it? You met her. Think. What did she say at your door? Everything, all of it, every word you can find. He closed his eyes. He was so tired. He made himself go back to the porch, to the lemonade, to Naomi's kind face, to the tired woman who wouldn't drink the glass, and he ran the memory like a man feeling along a wall in the dark for a switch. She left a pamphlet, he said slowly, and she wrote something on it. Naomi kept it a while. She felt bad. She stuck it on the fridge for months. It had a stamp on it, not a printed one, a rubber stamp, like from a... His eyes opened. Like from a library. It said something about the County Historical Archive, the reading room. She stamped her own pamphlets with the archive's address, because she volunteered there. She told Naomi she volunteered there on weekends, cataloging old deeds because... And now Isaiah Grant began, impossibly, to laugh, a wet and broken laugh, because she said it was the one building in this county that would still be standing and unburned in 100 years. She hid it in the history, Lena. She put the truth where they file the things nobody's allowed to throw away. The County Historical Archive closed at 5, and it was 10 past 4. They ran. Isaiah drove, and Lena called ahead, and the archivist, a patient woman who had never once been asked to hurry in her professional life, went into the climate-controlled back room and searched the acquisitions logged under the name of a former weekend volunteer, and there, cataloged in Carol Aldridge's own careful hand under a heading no company lawyer would ever think to subpoena, Coldwater Aquifer, Community Reference Materials, was a sealed archival box. Inside were her original laboratory notebooks, printed copies of every email, including the chairman's 4-sentence reply. And on top, in a notarized affidavit dated 3 weeks before her death, in the steady handwriting of a dying woman who had decided the truth would outlive her. To whoever opens this, I am Dr. Carol Aldridge. I tested the water. It was poison, and they knew, and they fired me, and I could not make anyone listen while I was alive. If you are reading this, then either I finally got someone to look, or I am gone, and someone found it anyway. Everything in this box is true, and I will swear to it before God. The children were the most exposed. Please, someone, make them say it out loud. She had signed it, and below the signature she had written one more line, the line that Isaiah Grant would carry for the rest of his life. Water remembers where it's been. I only wrote it down. It was the thing Naomi used to say. Water remembers where it's been. Isaiah had thought it was his wife's own saying. Now he understood she must have heard it once. from a tired woman on a porch and kept it without knowing where it came from and passed it to her husband, who passed it to their son, so that the dead chemist's words had been living quietly in the Grant family's kitchen the whole time, waiting. In the morning, before Judge Stroud could rule, Lena Brandt asked to be heard. Your Honor, the defense has moved to exclude the Corliss emails as unverifiable in the wake of Mr. Rowe's death. I'd like to offer independent authentication that does not come from my client and does not come from the deceased. She lifted the archival box. These are the personal records of Dr. Carol Aldridge, the Corliss chemist, who authored the emails. She deposited them in the County Historical Archive in the weeks before her death 2 years ago, cataloged and dated by a neutral third party. And they have sat, untouched and outside the reach of anyone in this room ever since. They include her original lab notebooks, printed copies of the same emails Mr. Grant recovered, matching them line for line, and a notarized affidavit she executed before her death attesting to all of it. The documents are not the fruit of any theft, Your Honor. They are the fruit of a dying woman who did not trust these men to leave the truth standing, and who was right. Bradford Lyle came out of his chair. Your Honor, this is trial by ambush. This is authentication, Mr. Lyle, which you asked for by name yesterday. Judge Stroud was already turning pages. She read the affidavit. She read the 4-sentence reply from the chairman's office. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up, something in her face had closed like a door against the defense table. The materials are admitted, all of them. Sit down. And then the case turned the way a great weight turns, slowly and then all at once, because there was one more thing the box made possible. With the emails authenticated, Lena could now compel testimony about them, and she called to the stand a man who had spent the trial sitting silent behind the defense. Gordon Price, Executive Vice President of Corliss Chemical, and one of the 3 names CC'd on Dr. Aldridge's original warning 16 years before. He was the old man from the 3rd row, the one with the wet eyes and the folded coat, the one who had bowed his head on the first morning when Isaiah held up the page. Mr. Price, Lena said gently, 16 years ago, did you receive an email from Dr. Carol Aldridge warning that the company was poisoning the families of Maro Creek? Bradford Lyle objected. Everett Corliss turned in his seat and looked at Gordon Price with a stare that had ended careers. And Gordon Price, who was 62 years old and had done exactly what he was told for 40 of those years, looked back at his chairman and then looked past him, up to the visitors' gallery, where a nurse he had quietly paid to bring someone was sitting with a small child in a wheelchair. A little girl, pale, a knit cap where her hair used to be. That's my granddaughter, Gordon Price said to the whole courtroom, not to any lawyer. Ellery. She's 7. She's got what the Grant boy has. What Mrs. Grant died of. She's a Coldwater house, too. My daughter's house. The house I helped them buy, 2 miles from the plant, because I told them it was a good, safe place to raise a family. His voice did not break. It had gone past breaking, into somewhere flat and final. Yes. I received the email. I read it. I understood every word of it, and I said nothing for 16 years because I had a mortgage and a pension, and I told myself the science wasn't settled. He looked at Isaiah. It was settled. I knew it was settled. I helped bury the woman who tried to tell us, and then I watched the same water crawl up into my own family, into a 7-year-old, and I still said nothing until a man who cleans the floors at night did the thing I was too much of a coward to do. Mr. Price, Lena said, is this email genuine? It's genuine. Is the chairman's reply genuine? The one telling Dr. Aldridge not to call the health department? The one saying the decision was, quote, being handled? It's genuine. I was copied on it. Everett wrote it himself. He never let anyone write the important ones for him. Gordon Price turned his head at last and looked directly at Everett Corliss for the first time. You told us it was handled, and it was. You handled it for 16 years. You want to know what handled looks like? It looks like my granddaughter's cap. The courtroom made no sound at all. Lena let the silence do its work, and then she gathered the whole thing into a single blade and drove it home the way she had promised Isaiah she would. Mr. Corliss's counsel told this jury that the Grant family's well was toxic, she said, walking the rail, as if it grew that way, as if the ground betrayed them. So let's be clear about the one fact no lawyer in this room can spend his way around. PFAS do not occur in nature, not in any well, not in any spring, not in any rock on God's earth. Every molecule of it is manufactured by human hands in a place exactly like the defendant's plant. There is no such thing as a naturally toxic well of these chemicals. It is not possible. When they told you that well was born poison, they were not making an argument. They were counting on you not knowing that poison has a birthplace and a birth certificate and a father. She stopped in front of the jury. The well wasn't toxic, ladies and gentlemen. It was poisoned. There's a difference, and the difference has a name, and the name is on every one of these pages. She turned and faced the defense table. Mr. Corliss, 16 years ago, your own scientist wrote you 5 words. I'm going to read them to the jury now, out loud, the way she begged someone to, before she died waiting for it. We are poisoning these families. You read that, and you wrote back that it was being handled. Lena set the page down. It's been handled long enough. The arrest did not happen in a dramatic sweep. It happened the way real accountability happens, quietly and with paperwork, which is somehow worse for a man like Everett Corliss, who had always assumed the paperwork worked for him. The district attorney had been sitting in the gallery for 2 days. When the court broke, 2 investigators were waiting in the corridor, and there were charges that had grown over the course of the trial from a civil matter into something no money could paper over: conspiracy, reckless endangerment, obstruction of justice, and, once the tire tracks on that dry county road were finally photographed and the disposal shredder order tied back to a phone call, charges connected to the death of Curtis Rowe. Vincent Doyle was taken from his car in the parking structure. Everett Corliss was taken from the courthouse steps, in front of the cameras he had spent a lifetime managing, and for once there was no statement, no calm, even voice. Nothing but an old man being helped into a car with his hands behind him while the town he had poisoned watched. "Your well was toxic," a reporter called out, throwing the man's own words back at him. "Anything to say to Maro Creek, Mr. Corliss?" He said nothing. He had run out of the one thing money cannot buy back, which is the benefit of the doubt. The jury was out for less than a day. They found for the families on every count, and the number they wrote down was large enough to make the national news. But the number was never the point. The point was the finding that came with it, that the Corliss Chemical Company had known for 16 years and had chosen the profit over the warning and had let a town drink. The point was the court's order, entered that same afternoon, requiring Corliss to fund clean water for every Coldwater household and medical monitoring for every exposed child in Maro Creek for the rest of their natural lives. The point was that a 7-year-old named Ellery and a 9-year-old named Jonah were both, that week, moved to the top of the list, their care no longer a coin flip in a hospital parking garage. The theft charges against Isaiah Grant were dismissed. It is difficult to prosecute a man for stealing the evidence of his own family's poisoning once the world has seen what he found, and the district attorney did not try. Gordon Price resigned the day after his testimony. He also did something the law did not require, and no one asked him to. He gave a sworn statement naming every executive who had been in the room, every decision, every buried report, and he did it without a deal. Because a deal was not the point either. On his way out of the courthouse, he found Isaiah in the corridor, and the 2 men, the one who had cleaned the plant at night and the one who had run it by day, stood looking at each other, and there was a whole poisoned town between them. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Price said. "I'm not asking for it. I just wanted to say it to your face, because I said the wrong thing or nothing to too many faces for too long. I'm sorry about your wife. I'm sorry about your son. I had 16 years to be brave, and I spent them being comfortable. And it took a stranger's child dying in the room next to my own grandchild to—" He couldn't finish. Isaiah looked at him for a long time. "You got up on that stand," he finally said, "and you told the truth with your granddaughter watching and your chairman watching and your whole life watching. It was 16 years late, but you did it, and Roe never got to, and you did it in front of everybody." He put out his hand. "My wife believed people could turn around. She'd have shook your hand. So I will." They shook. It did not fix anything. It was not nothing. The surgery went ahead on schedule, covered now, and the shadow came out clean, and the doctors used a new word in the hallway, the best word there is, which is caught. Caught it early. The medical monitoring the court had ordered, the very order Corliss had fought, would go on catching things early in that town for decades, in children not yet born, sparing other fathers the hallway and the vending machine coffee and the word again. It is a kind of justice that keeps working long after everyone in the courtroom is gone. Isaiah brought Jonah home, and on the first evening back, the boy, thin, tired, alive, sat at the kitchen table, where his father had once laid out a termination letter and a disconnection notice and prayed, and Jonah asked for a glass of water. Isaiah went to the sink, out of 38 years of habit, and stopped with his hand on the tap. Then he smiled, and he went to the cabinet instead, and took down one of the sealed jugs of clean water that arrived now every week, paid for by the company that had poisoned the well, and he poured his son a glass and held it up to the light where it was clear the way poison is also clear. Except this time it was only water. "Here," he said, "this one's true." Jonah drank it, all of it, and set the glass down. On the fridge behind him was a child's spiral notebook, its cover labeled in careful 9-year-old print, "Water." And inside it, dated and dutiful, were years of a boy's small, honest observations. The day the tap tasted like the swimming pool, the day it tasted like pennies, the day it made his stomach hurt. A diary nobody had thought to take seriously until a lawyer held it up in a courtroom and showed the jury that even a child had known, had written it down, had been keeping the record the grown men were paid to shred. Isaiah had asked him once why he kept it. "Because Mom said water remembers where it's been," Jonah had told him, "so I figured somebody should write down where it went." That was the whole case in the end. Not the lawyers, though Lena Brandt had been magnificent. Not the verdict, though the verdict was large. It came down to a handful of people who refused to let the truth be shredded. A chemist who filed it in the history so it could not be burned. A technician who died trying to say it out loud. A coward who found his courage 16 years too late but found it in front of everyone. A father who opened a machine he was told to destroy. And a 9-year-old who wrote down where the water went because his mother told him water remembers. They will tell you the well was toxic. They will always tell you the well was toxic, whoever they are. Whatever the poison, that you were born broken, that the ground betrayed you, that it was bad luck and unsettled science and nobody's fault. They say it because it works, because it is easier to blame a well than to blame a man, and because the men who need it said are the men who can afford to say it 1,000 times. But a company can afford 1,000 lawyers, and it cannot afford one honest glass of water. It can shred a report. It cannot shred a river. It can bury a woman who tried to warn a town, and it cannot bury what she buried in the county archive. Under the one heading no one thought to burn. Sooner or later, the water gives up what you put into it. Sooner or later, it comes back up into a courtroom, into the light, into the hand of a father pouring a clean glass for a living son. Water remembers where it's been. Somebody just has to write it down and hold it up and refuse to sit back down until they read it out loud. Isaiah Grant refused, and the water remembered, and a town that had been drinking its own grief for a generation finally got to taste the difference.